Welcome to the raw and uncensored Ambitchious Podcast. During our time here together, I will be instilling all of the strength, power, and determination you will need to use the very stones thrown at you to build your ultimate empire. We will redefine the word bitch from the derogatory to the acronym being in total control of herself. So let's adjust our crowns and prepare to live life ambitiously.
Yeah, here I am, the original HBIC, Katie motherfucking Boyd. And on today's episode of the Ambitchious Podcast, we are going to go into a 3-part series, and it is all about being a parentified daughter. Yes, I'm talking about women because the Ambitchious Podcast mostly caters to the ladies, but you can be a parentified anything. And I'm going to talk all about it. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the signs that you are a parentified child. And then next week, we're going to get into all of the tools to actually heal. And then the third week, we're going to get deep into inner child healing. And remember, I told you when this first season started of these 12 episodes, I said that I'm going to be going really deep into my healing. That's why we're calling this 12-part episode The Healing Diaries. And I'm just being really raw and vulnerable and honest. And of course, you guys know I love to fuck around and I love to joke, but I have noticed through my own healing work and working with thousands of women all across the globe, whether it's in my one-on-one mentorship, coaching, and healing sessions, whether it is on the Ambitchious app, whether it is in Katie Boyd's Misfit Club, or just getting amazing emails and direct messages on Instagram and Facebook and stuff about what you have gone through out there in Ambitchious land. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's time to really get serious. There's a bunch of reasons why. One of the things is if you're listening to this in 2024, 2025 is the year of the snake. When we have years of the snake in Chinese zodiac, and I don't follow it to a T, but I'm very aware of all the things that are happening, around me and in the ethers and in the collective. When we have these years of the snake, you have two options. Either you, number one, you choose to shed the skin on your own, or number two, you're forced to shed the skin. Either way, it's going to be a lot of work, but I would rather do it on my own recognizance than actually be forced to do things that are hard. And I think that that's what we really have to focus on. So I'm going to talk a lot about myself because I was a parentified daughter. And I also want to say that if you guys haven't been following for a long time, or maybe you have, wherever you are in your ambitious journey, I have had a very tumultuous, up and down kind of roller coaster relationship with my mom and dad. And the older I get, the more that I realize that, my parents were doing the best that they could with what they had. And when I was born in 1981, they didn't have all the things, obviously, that we have today to learn and become better. And so while I'm not making excuses for my parents' shortcomings, I am saying that I love them and I have a great relationship with them. And there's still things about them that aggravate the actual fuck out of me. And I'm sure that my parents can't stand me sometimes as well. I'm sure the feeling is mutual. But one of the things that I decided, back in, I've been doing this healing work for a really long time, but back in 2018, when I started the Ambitchious Podcast, I always promised myself, and I always promised my listeners that I would always be real, raw, and just vulnerable as much as I can without hurting people. My parents, they're not part of my podcast. They don't come on, even though I really desire deeply for my parents to come in. I had texted my mom last week and my dad, and I said, hey, I want you guys to come on the podcast. And my mom nervously texted me back and she's like, what are you going to ask us? And I was really like, I just want you and dad to come on the podcast so the listeners can get to know you better. I also want to ask them like really kind of personal questions, but also just like questions that I think would be just so cool to ask your parents. And as your parents age, when they get older, there's always these questions that we want to ask our parents before they pass away. Cause none of us are getting off this big blue ball alive. Right. But I think a lot about, God, when they pass away, whenever that happens, like, who am I going to ask about questions that I've never asked before? So I think it's important, if you do have parents and you do have a relationship with them, to actually have these uncomfortable conversations. And here's the deal. Like, I am a public figure. I have chosen this life, right? I've had a television show that's still being syndicated all across the globe. I have been on tons of different television shows, magazines, like you name it. I've never been a private person. And that is, for me, a difficult position, because I always like walk this very fine line with like how much I release out to the world without overexposing myself, and also protecting myself and protecting my loved ones. So it is this weird paradoxical kind of energy, this cognitive dissonance, that I'm always kind of stuck in between a rock and a hard place, where I'm like, I want to be raw and real and vulnerable, but then I also don't want to expose myself, but more importantly, expose the people that I love, that they didn't ask for this, right? So I always now really just try to be respectful, but I also am Katie motherfucking Boyd, so I'm not going to beat around the bush, right? And I hope that you guys love me, and I hope that you guys appreciate that about me. So today we're going to talk about being a parentified daughter. I cannot tell you how many women I have coached over the years that are and still are parentified daughters, were and still are parentified daughters. They don't even realize they're parentified. And I'm going to talk all about that today. But before I begin, let me get my cell phone out. Hold on, it's charging, because I've been using that bitch like it's a fucking 808 drum all day long, just stomping on it. Hold on. Okay. I want to read you guys the podcast review of the week, because I love a good podcast review. All right. So Kaylee from New Hampshire. I don't know who you are, Kaylee, but you have a beautiful name. And she gave me a 5-star review. And she says, this is my favorite podcast. As a business owner, a woman, and single mom, I absolutely love the realness of this podcast. I feel called out and brought to the carpet during so many of these podcasts. And that is exactly what I need to get motivated. Sometimes I forget my power and ability. Thank you for the constant reminder. I'm not sure what I will do when I run out of episodes to listen to. Well, Kaylee, hopefully that doesn't happen, but please email me at help, HELP, at kbmfc.com. I would love to send you a beautiful gift just to thank you for taking time out of your busy, ambitious life to leave me a 5-star review and a written review on iTunes. You can also do so on other podcast platforms, because as you know, the Ambitchious Podcast is everywhere that you can listen to podcasts, even on YouTube. So if you can leave a written review, please do so. And I would love for you to email me so I can get your address, so I can ship you a beautiful Ambitchious gift in the mail. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into this. I was freaking dragging my tits all day. I didn't want to do this podcast because I knew that it was going to stir up a lot of stuff in me. And remember, like, I've been doing this work on healing my inner child and reparenting myself for a really long time. But I've noticed as I get older, and you can only notice this as you age, there's different patterns that show up in your life over and over again. Like, I'm recording this in October. I love the fall. I love the Christmas, the crispness, the beautiful like scenes in New Hampshire, the trees and the mums and the the pumpkins and the gourds. I love this time of year. I love Halloween. I love Samhain. I love all this. But there's something about this time of year that I get very melancholy. And it's not like seasonal affective disorder or anything like that. It's a shift in energy. I'm still trying to I have some ideas why. And when I really get to the root of it, I'll share that with you. So I don't want to pre-ejaculate all over you and say something that's not true. But around this time of year, I always start looking at my life and being like, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know if I'm the only one in the world that ever gets like that, but I'm sure I'm not. But I'm always like, what the fuck am I fucking doing? And so when I get like that, I start to think about all these different aspects of my life that maybe aren't healed totally. And I saw something the other day. I don't know if it was social media or it was YouTube or whatever, but it was about parentified daughters. And I started watching it and I was like, oh, okay, this is just another word for like what I already know about myself. But I like how they give it like a real title so it's easy to describe. So I'm going to talk about the signs that you are a parentified child and you were a parentified child. And now that you're an adult and you still have these manifestations of being parentified. And I think that so many of you guys are going to listen to this podcast. You're going to be like, holy shit, this is me. Okay. So I'm going to take my microphone off the stand and hold it so I can really get into my notes here. Okay. So parentification is when a child is forced to take on the role of an adult. Many children get pushed into the role of a caretaker for their younger siblings or become the referee in their parents' arguments, that was my parentification. As you guys know, my dad struggled with substance abuse. And my mom, I just think, was codependently. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist. I only play one on television, but I do get down and dirty with this kind of stuff because I think that when you know better, you can do better. And when you figure out certain things about yourself, you can heal them easier. So for me, my parentification started when I was all by myself before my sister was born. And my parents would just argue and go crazy on each other and beat the shit out of each other. And they were always like in each other's shit 24/7. And now that I'm older, I'm like, well, duh, like my dad was, into substance abuse. And, my mother was, I mean, think about it, I think about this too. They were 24 years old when they had me. When I was 24 years old, I was blowing random guys in fields, drinking like Handle vodka. I was definitely not raising a child and running a business and having my own home. That was just definitely not, it was just, and I know like all my boomer people are like, well, it was just different times, Katie. It was no shit. I understand that. And just because it was a different generation, different times doesn't mean like what happened to any of us Gen Xers or millennials or whatever was right. It happened and I understand that. But now it's time to heal from it and really not only heal myself, but heal those and mend those fences and those broken parts of my relationship with my mom and dad and even my sister. And I'll get into this in a little bit. And I want you guys to also understand, like, this is real. I know you guys know, like, oh, Katie's so tough and whatever. I am tough, but like, it is not easy to talk about your family because it's something so sacred. But I try to be honest and real because I feel like when you're honest and real, you give other people permission to do the same. Okay. So let me get back to my notes here. So many children get pushed into the role of a caretaker for their younger siblings or become the referee in their parents' arguments. When caregivers aren't able to fully show up for themselves, children get put into developmentally inappropriate situations. Parentification occurs across a spectrum, and there are different levels of hurt that may develop over the years. There are also qualities that arise through parentification that may benefit you in certain areas of your life, like being responsible or a great caregiver. So parentification is not all bad, but it does have the potential to become catastrophic for a child and their adult self. And we may have to find the right balance between responsibility and structure and play and fun. Okay. So I want to now talk about signs that you were parentified as a child. Okay. So I would love to know how many of these signs that you, when you're listening to these things, you're like, oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, that's me. And I'm going to talk to you about the things that I feel as a parentified adult in my everyday life and maybe some little stories to out myself as well. Okay, so here's some signs that you were parentified as a child. So number one, you grew up feeling like you had to always be responsible. Oh my God, that is so me. Like, I feel like I am responsible for everyone's happiness. I'm responsible for everyone's joy, that I have to keep everything going. I have to be spinning all the plates in the air at one time and juggling multiple things. And I actually, I used to wear that as a badge of honor, but as I get older, it starts to become more exhausting, having to be responsible for everybody and everything. Now, mind you, I said feeling like no one has to be responsible for anything that they don't want to be responsible for. But when you're a parentified child, you just always feel like I'm the one that has to make the world go round. And that's an exhausting, soul crushing place to be. And maybe when you're younger, it doesn't bother you so much because you're young and dumb and full of cum and you're just like, whatever, man. But as you get older, you're like, fuck, like my soul is exhausted. Like, I don't know if anybody else in the world feels like their soul is exhausted, right? Because as a parentified child, what happens is you just grow up and then you are the mother who has to have the perfect birthday parties for their children, and everything has to be pristine and everything has to be in order. And, like, I'm planning a vacation right now to Europe, and like, I'm the one, and I'm not talking shit about my husband. He'll do whatever I ask him to do. But I'm like, I have to make sure that every restaurant is the best restaurant, and the hotel room that we stay in. And I know like when I'm taking the train and who's picking me up from the airport and la, 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 la. And it's like, it's not really an exciting fly by the seat of your pants type of time. Like, I am not a fly by the seat of her pants type of gal. So as an adult now, what I try to do, because I know that this is a problem with me, I try to be more carefree, and I try to do things a little bit more loose, even though it goes against every fiber of my being and who I am as a person. So number one is you grew up feeling like you had to be responsible for everything. Number two, you have trouble with playing or letting loose. Okay. If you guys know me, you guys know I love to have fun. But what I noticed lately, and what I've noticed recently, is my fun is fake. It's almost like how like autistic people, and I have a lot of friends who have autism or on the spectrum, and they'll say to me, a lot of my autism is like masking, like high functioning masking, where it's just like, okay, this is how I'm supposed to act. And I'm not saying I'm on the spectrum, but what I'm saying is, like, so many people think that I'm just so fun, but I almost feel like as I get older, my fun is more of a faux. It's more of a mask. It's almost like an act that I put on just to keep everything going the way I think it needs to go. And so, like, even if Matt's like, hey, let's go golf like this weekend. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to like have this long before I go golf and this long after I golf. And I have to like get my outfit ready, and I have to like know what I'm eating and who's driving. And like, it's just, nothing is just like sporadic and fun and just like impromptu. Everything is just too calculated. Sometimes it feels cold to be a parentified child. Like, you just feel like your life is very gray and cold. And even though I try to always have fun and laugh, and I think that this is why I've never really had a problem with alcohol, but I feel like alcohol would help me as an adult, like loosen up and kind of like let down my guard a little bit. And so during COVID, especially, I feel like I was abusing alcohol a little bit, and I started realizing that, oh, this helps me change my state. When I'm in a fear state or I'm in an uncomfortable state, this helps me change my state. And I can only imagine that a lot of parentified children have substance abuse problems, alcohol, drugs, or they have like addiction, gambling, sex, shopping, thrill seeking and things like that, because it's a state change. And when you're a parentified person, and you feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, sometimes that's what we seek the most, is like that dopaminergic, serotonin, like kind of like change your state type of energy. So that's number two. Number three is they like to feel in control. Dude, I am such a control freak that it's actually not healthy. And I know that about myself. I don't like people bossing me around. I don't like people busting my balls about things that are not their business because, they think that they know better than me. I like to drive places. I like to have my car at all times. I just am very freaky about having control. Yeah, I don't really know how much more to pontificate on that, Bad Larry, because I'm sure that you're listening to this and you're like, yep, that's me. Number 4, you were pulled into arguments or issues between your caregivers. So your caregivers don't have to be your mom and dad. It could be who helped you grow up. But I always was pulled into fights in my home. Like I remember my, dad coming home from, drinking, and my mom was like obviously worried about him, and he would come home and they would fight. And then I would get in the middle, like almost like as a small child, like I'm talking like 4 or 5 years old, like refereeing and peer mediating them. And, my mom sometimes still to this day will call my house and like call my phone and be like, oh, your dad's doing this and blah, 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 blah. Or, she'll talk about certain other people in my life and, or family members of mine. And then I'm always like kind of stuck in the middle. And I know she doesn't mean to do that to me to like whoop me up or fuck up my life or anything. I just think that sometimes what happens is you get this codependent enmeshment with the person who helped parentify you as a child, because, even when I was a little girl, my mom would be like, oh, your dad is this and he's that and he's this and that. And like, that's still my father, right? It's still my dad that you're talking about. It's still like the person that helped give me life. And that's a hard position for a young child to be in. And we're going to get to some repercussion stuff down the road, but like you may have been pulled into arguments constantly, or if your parents were divorced, which my parents were not, but if your parents were divorced, like you might go with your dad and he might talk shit about your mom. And then you might go to your mom's house for the next weekend and she might be talking shit about your dad or your dad's new girlfriend or whatever. And that's not healthy. Like that's what your parents' friends and therapists and people that they work with are for. Your children should not be used as therapizers, And I think that so many of us parentified children who now are parentified adults, we were definitely pulled into that as children. And I still am to this day. And Mom, I love you. Not talking shit. Love you long time, but you do that. And it's just a bad habit. And, I've gotten to the point in my life where I'm like, my mom is like in her late 60s. She ain't going to change now, And then what happens is, not to pontificate, but I will, because this may be another thing, is like you almost get addicted to being the person who is brought into these things because you feel like you may have like a purpose to help. Number 5 is you felt like you were given responsibilities that were not appropriate for someone your age. Maybe you were really young and you had to turn on the stove and cook for your siblings, or you constantly were cleaning, or you had to go to work at a very young age, or you had to be exposed to things that were not fit for small young children. Number 6, you often get complimented for being so good and so responsible. Everyone always is like, wow, you really just like never drop the ball and you always got your shit together. You always have your shit together, Katie. You always have your shit together. And I always tell people, yeah, right, dude. I'm like one fucking nutter butter away from having a full blown nervous breakdown. And I think a lot of parentified adults are like that. We don't want to hear that we're so good. We don't want to hear we're so responsible. We're exhausted. We are fucking exhausted from being so good and so responsible. Number 7, this is huge, guys. So big for me. I don't know if it's for you, but it's so big for me. Is you may feel that being self-reliant is better than trying to trust others. I have hardcore trust issues. I think that sometimes people try to push me to trusting them way too early and way too quick. And the biggest red flag that you're going to get from me is if you try to push me into something what I'm not ready for yet. And I'm also hyper vigilant because as a child, I couldn't rely on people because everything was so tumultuous and everything was so wishy-washy. And a parent would say, you know, like, I'm going to do this for you. And then they would forget, or I'm going to pick you up at this time. And then they couldn't show up because they were drinking or something happened. There was some drama. And, you know, if you've been left at school a few times, or you've been left at an after school program a few times, or you were told that someone was going to do something for you and they didn't, and you get that enough times as a child, what happens is, as an adult, you're like, well, I'm not going to trust anyone because my track record with other humans that are supposed to love me and care about me, they constantly and continuously have let me down. So why would I expect my next door neighbor or a friend from the gym or, you know, a person that I met in my service club? How can I rely on them? And this is nothing. Please don't take this and listen to this and be like, oh my God, she's talking about me. It has nothing to do with you. This is literally me, how my brain works. And I'm only doing this podcast because I know that there are so many other women out there that are feeling and going through the same exact things as me. Number 8, they don't really remember being a child. I do not have a lot of memories of my childhood. I maybe have a handful, and half of that handful is bad. Half of that handful is scary. It's fighting. It's drugs and alcohol and fight and just, you know, battling in my home. I mean, yeah, did I have a lot of great times in my childhood? 100%. But what happens is when you become parentified as a child, your brain goes into this self-preservation mode where it's like, we can't remember all these things because this is trauma. And your brain is amazing at trying to protect you from that. So if you are one of those people and you're like, I don't remember my childhood, and I cannot tell you how many women that I coach that literally say, Katie, I have no recollection of my childhood. And I'm like, yeah, because you're probably parentified or you were abused or you have a lot of trauma. Number 9, parents had trouble caring for themselves or others and placed the responsibility on you. Number 10, you often find yourself becoming a caregiver for others. Many parentified children who become parentified adults end up going into life coaching, some kind of service industry, some kind of coaching, medical. You know, you become a nurse, you become a doctor, you become a healer. You're a teacher, you're a social worker, you know, you're that kind of energy because that's all you've known. And also you get so much out of being that caretaker for others. People tell you how wonderful you are. You get seen, you get heard, you get acknowledged, you get validated. And to children, that's so important. You know, it's so important to have that validation. Number 11, being a caretaker feels good even when you are sacrificing parts of yourself. It's the Chiron wounded healer. They can heal everybody else and help everybody else, but not themselves. And that is, to me, it's a travesty. And I'm getting better at that, but I'm still not 100%, and I'm working on it every day. Number 12, you have a heightened sense of empathy and an ability to more closely connect with others. Yeah, I literally feel the pain of people around me. One of my good girlfriends the other day had this horrible thing happen to her where a dog bolted out of a house and she hit the dog, and the dog ended up having to be put to sleep. And I cried myself to sleep, and I didn't even do it. It wasn't even me in that car with her, but I love her so much. And she is such an amazing human. And oh God, a bird hit my window the other day in my backyard, and it was dead in my arms for 20 minutes. And I sat out there rocking the bird and praying over the bird. And all of a sudden the bird just woke up and flew away. And my husband's like, babe, we'll bury the bird. It's not a big deal. These things happen, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I'm staying out here until this bird wakes up. And listen, I'm not a dingling, okay? The bird was cold in my hands. The heart was not beating. It was the neck looked like it was broken. I don't know how it friggin' came to, but I was sick all day over this damn bird. That is usually a parentified child who has had trauma in their lives. Like they care so deeply about other people and animals and how other people feel. Like I'm the type of person, like I want to make everyone at a table at a restaurant comfortable. Or if I'm in a group of people, I want to make sure that I talk to everybody and everybody says, I say hi to everybody and everybody feels seen by me, right? They probably don't even care, but it's my own shit, right? Number 13, they feel like they have to always be the peacemaker in all like situations, all disagreements, all arguments. And a lot of times, number 14, parentified children, they feel like their efforts are not appreciated. Like they just feel like they do so much for so many and that no one really cares that much and no one really sees how much they were trying to do. And that is just for people who are parentified, it's such a heartbreaking feeling. I'll tell you that much. Number 15, they are overly responsible and overly self-reliant, and people usually tell them that they're old souls or they're wise beyond their years. It's like, yeah, dude, because I have had to be independent since I was 5 years old, and I've had to only learn to depend on myself forever and ever. Amen. Right? The next one, number 16, they have difficulty with vulnerability. Yes, I'm speaking to you. And a lot of these parentified children have always been in roles that required them to be the quote unquote strong one. And parentified daughters usually find it challenging to show vulnerability or to seek help from others. Like I would literally rather die than ask someone to help me. Now I'm getting better and better at it because I've put myself into places now where I have to delegate responsibility out or I will totally just burn out and I will end up having a grippy sock vacation. This self-reliance, though, can sometimes translate into difficulty beyond measure. And I'm sure that we could talk about that for a whole entire podcast. The next one is perfectionism. Okay. So the pressure to meet the expectations placed upon them can lead to perfectionistic tendencies. And as a result, many parentified daughters may strive to excel in all areas of their lives, academics, work, personal responsibilities, to compensate for their perceived inadequacies or to maintain control. And parentified daughters are usually the women that are more likely to burn out due to taking on too much responsibility. Like if you guys know me, it's like my house has to be sparkling clean. My clothes have to be a certain way. My Range Rover has to be like clean as a whistle. Even my dog has to be clean. Like everything has to be perfect. Like the way I decorate my front porch, the way that my studio is, Katie Boyd's Misfit Club, the way that my podcast is, how I speak to people, everything I do is just perfectionism. And if you really peel the onion down to the nub with perfectionism is just fear. It's fear of not being enough. It's fear of getting found out that you're some fraud or some fake. It definitely has a lot to do with imposter syndrome, but it's fear of losing control. It's fear of unraveling, of embarrassing yourself. It's scary. It's really not a good place to be. And believe me, I know. The next one is, and this is one of my biggest ones too, we have difficulty setting boundaries. Why do you guys think that I'm such a psychopath on the podcast or on my social media or on my app or or in my book that I wrote, Ambitchious? If you haven't bought it already, go to kbmsc.com and get your copy. But honestly, like setting boundaries is one of the hardest things to do when you have been a parentified daughter. And it's because it's actually due to early exposure to adult responsibilities. And parentified daughters may struggle with setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. They may have difficulty distinguishing between their own needs and the needs of others, leading to issues with personal space and self-care. 100%. The next one is a lot of times parentified daughters have a need, like a deep innate need to fix others, right? A lot of my clients who are or were parentified daughters always feel a constant need to take care of or fix others, sometimes at the expense of their own needs and well-being. This is rooted in their early experiences of needing to care for others to ensure family stability. And as a result, many end up staying in relationships where they have to be the parent or the more mature one in all of the relationships. Yep. The next one is they have earlier sexual behavior. So research on parentified daughters show that experiencing trauma and maltreatment in childhood is linked with higher chances of risky sexual behavior, including earlier sexual behaviors, higher numbers of partners, and impulsive sex, which, okay, don't call me to the carpet now. I'm a hoe for show. The next one is they I already said this one. Sorry, guys. My notes got jumbled. The next one is they have a constant need for approval. Parentified daughters often develop a heightened need for approval due to their early experiences of seeking validation through caretaking roles. Their self-worth becomes closely tied to meeting the expectations of others, as they have internalized that their value is measured by their ability to support and please the people around them. Absolutely. And last but not least, parentified daughters harbor a lot of guilt and a lot of resentment. They may experience feelings of guilt and resentment either for not being able to meet all the expectations placed upon them or for having to assume roles that deprive them of a typical childhood. So these are all of the, and I'm sure there's more, but these are the ones that really just kind of I feel most close to, and the things that I have an easier time speaking about because they're closest to me. But I wanted to first, in this episode, bring awareness to parentified daughter syndrome. And in the next podcast, I'm going to give you guys really tangible tools to re-parent your inner child. And then on the third episode of this podcast, which is obviously entitled Healing Diaries, but now we're getting into the healing of the inner child because, I feel like a lot of the work that I've been doing is healing my inner child. That's number one. Re-regulating a dysregulated nervous system from my childhood trauma. I have an incredible podcaster. Her name is Alex Vieira, and she specializes in nervous system regulation. So dysregulated nervous systems and how to regulate them. She's going to be coming up on the podcast in a few as well, which I think is so important because I've been doing a lot of what she talks about. I've also been doing a lot of somatic work in my everyday movement practices, which has helped me a lot. But I think this 3-part series within the Healing Diary series is so important because until you can really pinpoint, wow, I was a parentified child, and that's why I'm doing all these kooky, crazy, not so helpful things in my adult life. And like I always say, when you know better, you can do better. But until you know better, you can't do better because you have to name it to claim it. And then once you claim it, then you can heal it. So whatever you reveal, you can heal. But if you keep it in the shadows, it's never going to have its chance in the sun to, move that energy. So I just want to say, if you are listening to this podcast today and you are getting emotional because you're like, holy shit, that's me. I just want you to know you are not alone. This is something that I struggle with every day of my life. And I'm 43 years old. And I'm probably always going to have some kind of issues around this, probably until the day I die. But I'm going to work my ass off to heal this as much as I can before I shuffle off this mortal coil. But wherever you are out there in Ambitchious land, I want you to know that I love you and I see you and I validate you and I hear you and I am you. The only difference between you and I is maybe I have a couple more tools in my toolbox to help me heal. And that's what I'm going to share with you guys on next week's Ambitchious Podcast. So if you felt like this podcast was helpful, or you know people like this in your life and you want to share it out to them, email this to them, text this link to them, share it on your Facebook, share it on your Instagram, your TikTok, wherever, just put it on a Raven's claw and send it out to your friends. I don't care how it gets there, but just get it to the people that need it, because if we singularly heal, it will heal us collectively. And when we heal our world collectively, that's when our world is going to rise up. And that is when our world is going to remember who the fuck they are. And we are going to truly all step into our power. So I love you guys. Just know that you're not alone. And in the meantime, don't forget to stay ambitious. And I will see you next Tuesday.